welcome back. So we've got, excuse me, one more session then. We will break for lunch, but we've got a good one to take you into the big break. This is Maximum Impact, making media smarter, more effective and more connected. We've got some great people on this panel, and chairing it is our very own John Moulding, our technology editor. So I'm going to invite John and the panel out, and I'm going to let John make all the introductions to save us doing it twice, but please give them a very warm welcome.
That would be great. All right, hello everyone. Yes, well done. Okay, well we're talking about how we are excellent marketers and maximise effectiveness in an increasingly fragmented media landscape where we've got so many different channels to choose from now. And I think we've got a brilliant ecosystem to sort of help us through that. Emily Brotherwood at the far end with InfoSum, so data collaboration enabler really. Aaron Gray from a sort of a classic FMCG, Arla Foods. I'll let him tell you sort of some of the brands that they deal with. But we've got Harry King from LG Ad Solutions, so they're the connected TV, smart TV platform. Rebecca, or Bex Burchnall from PhD UK, so we've got the agency, and Wayne Butler from Sky Media, so very much the broadcast sales house with VOD, etc. And I mean, let's start with you, Bex, because I know we all know, we talk a lot about the challenges and the sort of problems with media fragmentation, but you also see it as a big opportunity. So just sort of explain, you know, how you make that work really well for you.
Yeah, so I think, it might be a slightly unpopular opinion, but I really see media fragmentation as a friend rather than a foe. I think it is complex to navigate, and I think it can be challenging for clients. It can be challenging. We talked in some of our early conversations, it can be challenging on budgets, it can be challenges on barriers, assets, measurement, all sorts of many different things. But actually, if you really embrace what fragmentation can do for you, think about the ways it can help you create multi-platform and channel experiences, how it can connect how the brand's perceived to how it's seen, to how it's sold in the store, and then really think about actually if you're going to create a media strategy and plan that answers to the power of fragmentation. If you actually start with your objective and who it is you need to deliver that objective against, it shouldn't feel like a fragmented approach. It should feel like something quite harmonious. It just might come through in many different touch points that you choose to build against. And
can it help you sort of move people down the funnel? I mean, presumably we can go from anything from sponsorship to 30 seconds right down to some very sort of tight activations.
Yeah, absolutely. And it obviously depends on your perception or value of the funnel, right? So there's lots of different types of funnel you can talk about. You know, in some categories, the funnel is almost dead and people don't necessarily move through it in the way that we would want them to. But arguably, fragmentation is absolutely a way of making sure that you almost deliver on all of the objectives that are required to sell your product or your brand. So whether that is a softer brand metric, whether that is a harder sales metric or a conversion metric, I think one of the things that fragmentation allows you to do is almost build for each of those scenarios so that there's no stone unturned when it comes to how you can communicate with a consumer.
And when you talk about experiences, what do you mean? Give us some examples.
So for me, what I kind of mean by experiences is the power to connect with consumers, not based on how you show up in an individual channel, but how you show up across all of those channels. So storytelling, an experience that primes someone into nudging them, into converting them into action, and not sort of assuming that a single asset or a single piece of work will do the job of everything you've got to achieve. You almost want to be able to recognize that in influencer, the experience you need to create does need to physically look different and work for the platform, but it still has to come from the same essence of the brand and proposition.
Okay. And Wayne, you agree that we need to talk more about the opportunities. So how do you see it in terms of, using different channels? Because, I mean, Sky, you begin with TV. You're a massive TV supplier. I mean, what else do you use? Can we use? I mean, just talk us through your sort of view of this.
Yeah, so unashamedly, I think TV is a sort of foundation of where any media plan should start. I agree with Bex. I think we love to talk about fragmentation as a problem, but it really just depends on your mindset. You know, choice is really how we should describe fragmentation. And what we now have is an environment where we've got different environments that do different things. And I think, I identify with the fact that I think a planner's job today is increasingly more difficult than it's ever been. And I do have some empathy for them. And it's hard work, particularly in a climate where costs are under pressure. And we heard from speakers earlier today about, when you've got a limited budget and you've got an FD breathing down your throat, that can force decisions to be a bit more about short-termism, and it's difficult for those sort of seasoned marketers to sort of resist that pressure. But that's where I think the choice we have available to us really gives it almost like a tool set for advertisers to work with. And the key, as Bex was alluding to, is knowing what each platform, channel, medium delivers. And once you figure that out, you start with your campaign objective, and it's really just about picking those platforms and channels that deliver that for you. So, if you're looking for mass reach, again, TV is never going to be beaten on delivering relatively cheap mass reach. But then what do you layer on top of that? And it comes back to what are you trying to achieve? If you're trying to get exposure, where do I find that? Who am I missing? Because I think where fragmentation has caused complexity is we've just got more players vying for the same pie. A lot of it's not additive anymore. It's substitutional. And it's about working out, I've got 5 options, but they're all going to give me the same thing. I'm also a big advocate for sort of one of my kind of North Stars is if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So I recognize you can't measure everything and you can't measure everything in the same way. But having the evidence that says, I know what this platform's going to give me, I know how that fits into my strategy, there's some measure of quantifiable outcomes that I can take back to the FD or the CFO to show that there's been some benefit. We're a big fan of incrementality. So it's a blessing in disguise, depending on mindset.
So just sort of briefly, what can Sky offer beyond the big TV experience? Because I know you've got the Sky Publisher Player, you've got, I think you're part of TikTok Pulse Premiere, you've got YouTube clips. Is this what you're talking about in terms of layering on top?
So Sky is sort of, if you go right up to the top level, our strategy is very much an aggregation, one of aggregation. Even if you just look at our subscriber model and our consumption model, Sky channels are a relatively small percentage of our overall media offering. We partner with the likes of Paramount and Warner Brothers to collate all that in one place, to make it really easy for consumers to sort of consume this fragmented market in one simple way. And that ethos travels all the way through. So although we are a TV business at heart, we actually are one of the largest YouTube resellers. We've developed a range of digital products like Sky Publisher Player, as you allude to, which is it's a syndicated player that we put on third-party websites so that you can access quality premium content in a brand-safe environment that sort of is trusted with Sky. We resell social and inventory and social as well. So we're trying to take away the complexity. And actually, if you bought across all Sky Media's portfolio of products, you're probably reaching 92% of the UK market.
Okay. And Aaron, for a fast-moving consumer goods brand, what does this sort of channel fragmentation mean for you? Is that a benefit? Because classically, FMCGs used to love the big, fast reach build of TV and radio when we had everybody in the same place. Is your life easier now?
Quite a big question, but with regards to how we look at our media, I think now there's been more onus than ever to have a story and a purpose behind the creative that you're building, something that will allow you to move through the multiple different channels, but with that red thread that connects everything. I think when you are looking at your channels, yes, there is more data available than ever before. So that means within the planning process, your objective and your audience needs to be clear. I think if you've got a clear objective, the role of each channel becomes a lot more obvious. And if you've got a clear story, you know how that's going to show up and become channel native. So I think, to be fair, a lot of my thoughts align with what Bex has opened with, that creative is the thing that carries through this fragmentation. So while you will build your memory structures in TV, out of home, like you always have traditionally, having these other platform native creatives is a route to look at.
You had this sort of classic out-of-home creative at Westfield that got a lot of applause with a 3D bottle, milk pouring out of it. And you use TikTok. I think you do native TikTok and presumably Meta and YouTube. Do you generally do sort of native advertising? Can you afford to do lots of native advertising? Can you personalise much?
So It's also dependent on the brand. So as Arla, we've got a network of 15 different brands, and your strategy for a brand like Lurpak with such high penetration versus something like Castello or Culture or one of the new brands, it's a completely different attitude that we need to take towards it. The big out-of-home elements, especially when we're trying to drive Arla as a brand itself rather than people just recognising the sub-brands that sit underneath it, those big activations, like you mentioned at Westfield, are really important to do that, to get people to pick things up in store and think, I actually realise this is an Arla product. When you look at sort of native, we don't do tons of native, but we do a lot of like native creative in the sense of it's built purposely for TikTok, it's built purposely for Meta, it's built purposely for SVOD, AVOD. So it's very dependent on the brand, on the audience, and what we're trying to achieve.
And when you hear people talk about AI and personalisation at scale, does that excite you? Does that sound realistic?
For me personally, yeah. I think it's there's obviously elements out there and tools available to help personalisation at scale as it stands, but anything that's going to accelerate that, especially when you look at the amount of data points available now, AI can be a massive player in that, because the volume of assets that are going to be needed to run an effective campaign in such a fragmented market is only going to increase.
Okay. Now, we'll get to you, Emily and Harry, in a minute, but I think, Bex, you got something to say on personalisation?
So I'm a really big fan of personalisation, but I think, and to go back to funnel-type language, I think the job that we have to do as planners is to be really clear on where it's additive. Like, there is a potential world where personalisation could go to such an extent that you actually lose the value of a brand and what the brand means and its position and its role in media marketing in consumers' lives. So there's definitely a place and a space and a time for it. And for certain categories, it's got way more importance than others. I work in automotive, where personalisation is incredibly important as you get further down, that messy middle of choice and where you're going to make decisions. But I'm a big believer in the power of a brand, and I do think there is also a slight area of not wanting to dilute what a brand means and stands for, because it ends up becoming so many different things to so many different people rather than one thing to many, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. Okay. And Harry, you've, your platform can put advertisers in front of people in multiple touch points, and you sort of have this holistic view. I mean, this is your big kind of message quite often. You've got this holistic view of what people are doing on the screen. Whether they're watching linear or, VOD, etc. I mean, just talk us through your role in terms of, helping brands reach people in more places.
It's almost a sales pitch. Yeah, I mean, it's really important to talk to the agencies and work out what their KPIs are before they brief us, because we have multiple products at LG, on the home screen especially, where if there's like a product launch, for instance, we offer sponsorship takeovers, roadblocks, where they're the only brand on the TV for 24 hours, for instance. Or if they want to run a month-long campaign and they need VTR, then we look at our other products like LG channels. We've got cross-device products as well, where we can target people on their mobile, depending on the IPs with the TVs and the Wi-Fi. So there's loads that you can offer and do at LG. It's just really important when it comes to planning a campaign to make sure that we're all aligned with everyone's values and what they're trying to get out of it.
Okay, I saw on your website, I can't remember who said it, but they said people should start thinking about CTV first planning. Are we really at that point?
The OEM plays a very different role in CTV. We're the first point of call. You turn on the TV, it's either a Samsung, an LG, Philips, Hisense, so on. And that's where we can hit you with an ad. We don't know if people are going through to Netflix, Amazon, Disney. Are they seeing an ad? Are they paying for SVOD where they're not going to be subscribed to it? So do we know if they're going to be watching an ad in those apps? No. So with the role of the OEM, LG, Samsung, and so on, it's important for us to get the message across that we can target audiences before they hit that AV journey. And it's just like a great way to sort of provide people with context and brand safety, and just letting them know that, 100% viewable, it's there, it's available, the OEM is there, we've got the data to provide it, we've got the measurement on top of it. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think CTV as a whole should be first on plan, but the role of the OEM certainly could be.
Okay, and you can advertise in games, and you get a lot of visibility of what people do in games. And then I saw that you're going in car soon. You've got a sort of content platform.
Yeah.
Kia are launching.
Yeah, I can't talk about that yet.
You can't talk about it. Okay, well,
only because we don't know really what's coming from it.
Okay, but there's more channel fragmentation to come, and the car will be one of them.
Yeah, cars being one. Fragmentation is a tricky one. I've always been a CTV and Sky, so I'm very particular around TV and the big screen. Before I was at Rakuten, and fragmentation was always the topic of point because there's so much overlap, so much duplication with different channel partners. I've absolutely lost the train of thought here with the question, but with LG,
so anyway, there's more fragmentation to come.
There's a lot of fragmentation, and we're trying to make sure that what we can do at LG is target that audience. So like you mentioned with gaming, anyone who is playing a game on the LG screen through HDMI port, we can track it. We know what they're playing, when they're playing, what they're playing on. So yeah, there's a lot that we can do with other products and other services, and the audience that we can target is very vast.
Okay. And Emily, in terms of making brands smarter with their data, I mean, this is, your kind of bread and butter, I guess. I mean, just talk us through what we can do with data now because of data collaboration and how that's going to make campaigns more effective.
I think, first of all, it's important to note that not all data is going to be relevant for your brand. So it's really important to acknowledge that, and we've spoken a lot about kind of being really clear on your objectives, and that definitely stands when it comes to data. Look at your data at first point, what can you see about your customers? That's going to be the gold standard. But then I think what's equally as important is to really understand what you can't see. So even if you're a really data-rich business, there's going to be multiple different things you don't know about your customer outside your brand. And I think if you're clear on your objective, that's when it will enable you to be a lot more direct with the collaboration partners and really kind of be strategic with who you're working with. So that's kind of the first point. And then I think the actual practical application of it is really, really end-to-end. So before you've even, spent a penny in media, how can you leverage, collaboration from a planning and insight point of view? Is there something about your customer that will enable you to reach them more effectively with different, messaging, or are there cultural moments that you can see they have an affinity to that allows you to be around that? So I think understanding those behaviours up front will obviously just then feed into a much more effective strategy. So beyond targeting, leveraging at every stage.
Okay. And you had a client who obviously we won't mention, but they thought most of their audience was female.
Yeah.
And you discovered that actually it was half male.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's things like that. So it was a sun cream brand. So yeah, big global sun cream brand. And yeah, just assumed that half their shoppers were female, and then by partnering with the sort of demographic type data set, actually revealed that 48% were male. So for them, understanding that, it unlocked like a whole new marketing strategy and a whole new audience that they could then go after, which obviously data, and the collaboration piece played a big role in. So.
Okay. And what about if a brand is data poor? I mean, obviously, there's lots of D2C brands now who are just loaded with data. But, and I guess Aaron, as a FMCG, maybe you might fall into that category. But, I mean, how do we make sure they're part of that, data enablement sort of world?
I think data-rich businesses are making their data so much more readily available. And like FMCG, grocery, that's like the retail media networks that are being stood up. We're seeing that be a massive kind of investment area now, which is great. But also the stand-up of other verticals. So things like auto, travel, you've got these really data-rich businesses that are making it readily available for those that can't see it. And then I think what's really exciting is the non-endemic uses of that data. So actually it's not limited to only travel brands that can use that, or only auto brands. Actually, the creative use of those data signals is just making it, available on a much broader spectrum.
Yeah. And Aaron, what can you do with retailer data? I mean, is that a game changer for you? Because you don't have your own commerce platform, do you? So you still largely rely on sort of bricks and mortar retailers?
Yeah, so without ownership of our own conversion point, it's very difficult for us to map what is happening with consumers and get closer to them and understand them a little bit more. So traditionally where we've been placed is we've got a strategy that's solely building the brand and a strategy that's solely drive that sale in store or online on one of the retailer websites. However, the way that we can utilise data now allows us to create that sort of, as referenced earlier, the messy middle that Google referenced, where we have a deeper understanding of what that consumer's motivation is at that point in time. So just being able to tap into things like understanding this consumer has bought into category but not your product is a different mentality to someone who is a lapsed customer of you, and how can we then look to tailor what we're doing from a creative perspective to answer that question. And I think when you look into things like data clean rooms, that's starting to help us navigate commercial conversations, because we can't be seen as a brand with such wide distribution across all the major retailers to be favouring one or the other. And once retailers start to take branded budget, it becomes a difficult commercial conversation the next year in terms of it gets all brought into one retailer pot when those conversations happen. So utilising clean rooms, having agreements where we can, let's say, overlay multiple retailers into one, understanding who we're targeting, gives us a massive opportunity to become cleverer with what we do effectively.
And actually, I think, I think that's actually where I differ quite a bit in terms of the fragmentation point of view, because I think from a technical point of view, that the capabilities are there to actually start bringing this together, bring multiple retailer data together, bring multiple publisher data together to give you that single view of output. And I think actually it's more about the rest of the ecosystem leaning into those technical capabilities and advertisers demanding more from them for us to actually get to more of a unified view. And I think fragmentation doesn't need to be complex, because actually the solutions are there, it's just people need to adopt it.
So do you have clients who are looking at a holistic view of all retail? They've got multiple retail data partnerships going on at the same time to give them one big picture?
I guess at the moment, though, the current setup is quite siloed, retailer to retailer, and that's kind of what I mean in terms of if the sort of political barriers are broken down and actually lent into more open collaboration across like category level and across retailer, then the technical capabilities are there. It's just at the moment it's obviously a bit more siloed.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I just interject on that as well? I think the challenge we have with data is twofold. One, not all data is born equal. The quality of data is really, really important. Just the idea of data alone isn't good enough. And I think we do have a problem where there's lots of data out there, but it's all disparate. It isn't all brought together under one unified place. And I think that's where brands need to rely on the publishers to play a bigger job. I know at Sky we're spending a lot of time as a publisher trying to make that our responsibility and take that pain away from the advertiser. Knowing who's doing what they're doing, where they're watching, having access to retail data, to behavioral data, so that you can make more intelligent decisions. And then just as importantly, the ability to connect all of that. And I think the connectivity is the key issue. The advice I'd give any advertiser is if you've got first-party data, brilliant, but it's really hard to activate data. It's perceived to be hard, at least. Actually, it isn't as hard as Emily says as it sounds. Just partner with those publishers that are actually investing heavily in their data proposition. We spend a huge amount of time and money on building out a data environment that allows us to connect what this is perceived to be this really fragmented world. So we know at an individual level what someone is watching. We know who they are, not just that they're a device. We have a bunch of information about them that we buy in, and we partner with retail partners and third-party providers to enrich that. So you can actually build a very clear picture of who your audience is. At Emily's point, you can actually bring that data in and we can profile that data. We can actually say, give us a subset of your customer. We can tell you a lot about them. We can tell you what they're watching. We can tell you what they look like. We can change some perceptions as to what your audience makeup is. We've had lots of examples. We had a gambling brand who came in and sort of believed their own rhetoric that their customers are high affluent. Clearly that's not the case, and we were able to sort of debunk that and not only build a proper profile of what their customer looks like, but we can actually activate that. We can actually convert that. With the advent of addressability, you can actually go after these audiences at quite a niche level.
Yeah. And Bex, I know you wanted to dive in when we were talking about retail data, but I mean, in this sort of, we've got so many lovely signals coming now, from various verticals, even in like auto, etc. I mean, how important is this for brands? Is it a game changer?
I think it is. I mean, I think data, to Wayne's point, can take so many different forms that you can almost slightly get lost in data simply, and I say simply without it actually being simple at all, being a way of targeting lots of different groups of people and using personalisation, etc. But as a planner, I think some of the most exciting uses of data is when it really shapes something different. To Emily's point about the sun care brand, and an example that comes from one of our creative agencies within Omnicom, which I just love, was that they used some Amazon sales data to understand the treating behaviours of pet owners. And they identified that dog treats were bought 4 times more often than cat treats. And so what they did with that was not go, all right, well, we need to serve more cat treats to people who own cats. They created an AI set of assets that were cats dressed as dogs and turned it into something that was fun. And that's our job. Our job is fun, right? And you want to do great work that, you know, yes, of course, makes a difference. But I think fragmentation and data should make planners' jobs fun and more interesting, as well as give you the actual piping to be able to make it a more connected and better experience for customers.
And I do think that's why it's really important to have such an open mind and be up for trying new things, you know, working with partners that you might not necessarily think are who you would usually work with to unlock like really interesting and creative insight, which you can then obviously use to really cut through and stand out.
Okay, and Aaron, as a FMCG, do you have a very fine balance between how much data you want to actually pay for? Because, I mean, presumably you want to reach most people, do you?
Yeah, it's like some of the fees that you look at as well, we're in the stage of having to prove the concept back to the business at this point in time, because you pay such high data fees that, in effect, you're trying to get the balance of, is it better to have a little bit of wastage or be right on point, and are we going to utilise that data in a solid enough way to convince someone to change their milk brand? It's not a big purchase decision, it's a habitual one. So we're trying to get that understanding. Do we want to go as broad as possible to reach as many people as possible, or are we wanting to really hone in on, for example, lapsed customers or people buying in category? So it's a very fine balance, and one that we're still working through as a business.
Okay, and how do you, in terms of your measurement, how do you pick apart all these channels now? There's so many. How do you know which one, you know, what each channel is contributing, and build that into a sort of a picture that you can basically present to your board, like where we should be spending?
Yeah, so we're fortunate enough with some of the budgets that we've got that we're able to utilise mixed media modelling as a centre point to all of that. But what we're trying to do now is feed in additional data sources into the mixed media model, because I think as good as MMM is and gives you a clear picture of which channels are performing, it's solely focused on an ROI, and it's historical data looking in the back mirror, so you're unable to see some of the more up-and-coming channels unless you strategically plan to test and learn with those, which is, again, something that we're looking at as a business. Within our mixed media model, for example, we're now bringing in the brand tracking data. So what we want to do is establish it's not just an ROI figure. How is the brand impacting our bottom line on a long-term basis? And I think one of the most interesting things that we found in a recent study we did, that our Anchor butter brand, 48% of the long-term ROI was attributed to long-term brand building, as opposed to that short-termism. And I think that's a way that we can continue to basically marketing, having those data sources. But outside of that as well, we've got to understand as a business that there are tons of blind spots. So we're trying to work on a method where we can bring in the e-com and shopper data, which is the conversion data from retailers, and understand how are they performing against benchmark, and inevitably move towards what we want to call a holistic ROI, which is a proof of concept at the minute, but takes in all media as one pot and kicks out how is it performing overall.
Okay. And Harry, do you view your platform as full funnel? I mean, you can do brand, obviously, and I know your home screen ads are a classic example of brand, but they're also interactive. Do you see sort of CTV and, you know, your smart TV touch points as performance media as well?
No. It depends on the creative as well. I think it's really important for, again, when you're chatting to agencies and planners, is what's the creative going to look like and what's the message behind it? And then that's when you can start to work out, okay, well, how far down the funnel do we want to go here? Again, that then alludes to my point about what products are they going to pick on the LG platform, because depending on the products, that's where I would then suggest a different idea behind it. I don't think for such like retail media, for instance, I don't think is massive at the moment like CTV. There's not a lot behind it. It's very tricky to convince the user to whip their phone out and then start buying on the screen. So I think there's different points around it, but no, I don't think that CTV is that like full funnel picture at the moment.
Okay. So in terms of understanding the outcomes, I mean, just very quickly, Emily, tell us how you help a brand know what they gained from a campaign, and then we'll talk about sort of more holistic measurement after that. But you sort of give us the sort of the nuts and bolts, if you like.
Because we actually have seen some examples where CTV does actually drive sort of acquisition sales. So I guess sort of InfoSum's point of view, our role would be to actually be able to tie deterministically that outcome. And when I say outcome, I mean any kind of metric that the brand is measuring in terms of sales, uplift, acquisition, to exposure data from the publishers, to essentially enable them to understand the actual uplift of that particular activity. So yeah, we actually have seen the role of CTV shift with examples of, leveraging retailer data across BVOD, driving, 122% uplift in sales. So we actually do see that shift, but obviously there is a complete role for brand as well, and it needs to be considered, of course, as like that channel that does that as well.
Okay, we've got 3 minutes left, so I'm sorry, but we won't do audience questions, just because I want to ask this question to Wayne and then Bex and Aaron to finish up. Are we going to achieve a holistic measurement of all these cross-channels, cross-media? So we have this big, wonderful kind of measurement solution and you can do everything holistically, or do we have a future where we still have to piece things together? So let's start with you, Wayne, we'll just go down the row.
I think a bit of both. And I don't think we're close to having a single currency across all measurement, but I think we are aspiring to that, and we just keep raising the bar on that. I mean, I think measurement is probably in the most exciting phase that it's ever been in that we're now able to connect who's seen an ad to what the action is that's been taken. And we can start to do that across more channels. The digital players have always been well ahead of us in that game, but we're now able to do that much further up the funnel, right up to TV. There's a lot of collaboration in the space, so even at the broadcaster level, Sky ITV Channel 4 are collaborating on something called Lantern, which is to basically bring TV measurement into the 21st century, make it measurable in the same way. And we're also using a combination of tools, so it's not just tagging and IP matching, but it's going back to some traditional means like panels. And what that's allowing us to do is, in the world of TV, understand the interplay between somebody who sees an ad, whether they go on to visit the website, but also what else do they do? Do they use their phone to search for a brand? Do they go onto YouTube? How do they use social? Like we heard earlier how TikTok's become the new search engine. And we're seeing a lot of signals now that are allowing us to piece that together. So I think measurement is going to evolve very quickly. I think it's going to improve to a standard that's acceptable for people to make quality decisions from.
Okay, Bex.
I love the aspiration and completely agree that there needs to be a point where we get to something that is holistic. My only worry within that, or kind of the watch out, is just not wanting to try and judge everything by the same contribution or the same end goal. So I think it still needs to have, measurement will always need to have an element of clarity on the jobs to be done and the roles that every individual part of the plan is playing. So I think, I've seen examples of clients trying to measure influencer and cultural activity against a return on investment, which, given that that is not the job it's there to do, it immediately means that when you are talking to FDs now as well as CMOs, those things come out of the plan, which if you go back to creating experiences and building for consumers, I think that it's absolutely about trying to get an understanding of the contribution everything plays to the absolute end goal of the business, but not necessarily wanting to do that at the detriment of a single unified measurement point, for example.
Okay, Aaron, just finish us up then with your view on whether we get to this sort of nirvana measurement solution.
Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get there, especially with ourselves not owning a conversion point, which is just another hurdle. But effectively, I think we can get to a place where we centralise different data sources and look to analyse those data sources in a way that takes the uniqueness of each channel and job to be done, and then say, has this delivered on the purpose that we've done that? Because if you try to use one single measurement solution, all it's going to open up is a ton of blind spots that will just leave you making decisions based on bad data, whereas if you can bring in as many sources as possible and open up the conversation, that's where I feel the direction's going.
Okay, so in 5 seconds I might as well open it to Harry and Emily. Yes or no on that question?
No.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. All right, that's brilliant. Thank you very much for all your insights. Absolutely fabulous.